Made for Me, Chapter 37. "What's this?" Glenda asked, obviously wondering what to make of the witch, the scarecrow, and the black goblin figurines and Danielle's credenza. "Halloween," Danielle replied happily. "This is my favorite." She pointed to a cauldron on her desk that she'd filled to the brim with candy. It was held in place by a grotesque witch with a green face and glowing red eyes. It even had a motion sensor, causing the witch to cackle every time a person took a piece of candy. Glenda was left without words, and Danielle guessed the woman didn't care what she celebrated, as long as Danielle was bringing home the results, which she was. Danielle popped an M&M into her mouth. She'd had to track down a shop catering to expats to find it. The small concoctions were definitely lowbrow compared to the pure Swiss chocolate, but they had a specific flavor Danielle simply couldn't replicate for Halloween. It was the one treat she had to have, more so this year than before. Ulrich had requested a one-on-one meeting with her. He told her another $700 million was going to be placed in her accounts, the funds originating out of Geneva from the Metlerin family. Danielle had been shocked. "Results speak for themselves," Ulrich had said. He then brought up the gift MRD had provided her months before. "Did you ever use the tickets to attend a summer or early fall event at the Opera House?" Danielle admitted she hadn't. "I should have returned them. I've never been a fan of going places alone, and it's probably not going to change." He refused to take the tickets back, encouraging her to go the following weekend. "You really should try. Just once," he encouraged. "The seats are relatively private, in a box, and you won't be disturbed or even forced to sit by a stranger." Well, that might make a difference, she thought. It's the opening night, and the best ballerina in the world is showcased. It will do you good. Perhaps, but it certainly wasn't going to do her any harm. Saturday evening, Danielle walked between the three-story pillars of the Zurich Opera House and presented her ticket to the tuxedo-dressed security guard. Those present were dressed in elegant evening attire, and she was glad she chose the dark brown chiffon and lace dress with a three-quarter length. She'd been afraid of standing out as it was, coming alone. At least this way, she blended in with the crowd, the brown about as boring as one could get. A man glanced at her ticket. "Your box seating provides complimentary beverage service," he said, pointing to the stairwell or the elevator best suited for her seats. "This is on the third floor, closest to the stage, the best in the house." He smiled with a slight bow. She thanked him, taking the elevator. The box was on the left side of the stage, nearest to the performers. "This way, ma'am," said an attendant in perfect English. He offered her the choice of 5 seats, 3 in the front row, 2 in the back, all plush red velvet with gold trim. "Will guests be joining you this evening?" She was disappointed he'd not even tried using German with her. "No, I'm alone," she replied. He took her drink order and when he returned, pointed out the small binoculars and program in the pocket in front of her. It's in English as well. Sipping her drink, she took in the grandeur of the theater. The Zurich Opera was the smallest world-class opera in the world, but considered one of the best. The U-shaped theater had box seats in the inner rim on the second and third floors, with general seating behind, but only the first 3 boxes on this floor had a special upper canopy-like dome atop. The additional layer of privacy was unnecessary, she thought. One couldn't see the patrons from any angle, except directly across the theater in the other box. Danielle sighed as she flipped through the program, unable to stop thinking about her father. He had sounded worse the last 2 weeks, and the latest test results weren't encouraging. But he refused to talk about it, insisting he was doing all he could, a fact the doctor had confirmed. His attitude was positive and his ceaseless words of encouragement heartfelt. When she told him several recruiters had contacted her, he sounded pleased, even though both calls had ended abruptly when they learned of the non-compete and buyout clauses. "It doesn't matter," she told her dad. "I am not going anywhere." Time was marching along, and in the not-too-distant future, she could stay with MRD, resign, or effectively retire for a period of time and work in the restaurant to fill the hours in the day. She enjoyed being there, filling in for the waitstaff and hanging out. She truly adored Max and the guys, constantly joking with them when they dropped by. The overhead lights soon dimmed, and the attendant asked her if she'd like another sparkling water with lime. The music had just started when she saw a figure enter the box and take the seat next to her. Her heart pounded and she felt her hands turn cold. She knew the scent. Only one man wore it. She was wrong about coming. It could do her harm. Stymied, She did nothing for 2 seconds. Then she grabbed her purse with her right hand, looping the strap around her palm. "Danielle, don't leave." The request was accompanied by a hand on her arm. "Please, stay and talk to me." It was the please that stopped her. The music continued its introductory crescendo of ups and downs, setting the stage for the curtain to be raised. She hesitated, knowing instinctively where this was going to lead. She closed her mind to the thought, there was another choice, to have a reasonable adult conversation with a man who completely consumed her mind and her body. She inched back in her chair until the high-backed red cushion pressed into her shoulder blades. She then placed her fingers on either side of his palm, lifted it up and off her arm. "Thank you." 2 more words that Lars had never uttered. Danielle crossed her legs, still not looking at him. She inhaled, allowing herself the momentary enjoyment of his intoxicating smell and the spike of desire she experienced even being by him. "Danielle," he started, "this was the only place where I could speak with you in private. I couldn't do so at the office, and the probability was high that you would have rejected an invitation to talk elsewhere, so I had to wait." That much was true, she grudgingly admitted to herself. Still, she wasn't inclined to give him the satisfaction of responding. The curtain rose and Danielle was transported back to 19th century Russia. She found it ironic that this ballet, of all the performances she could be watching, was that of an ill-fated love triangle. "Danielle, look at me." Danielle stared at the beautiful ballerina who danced across the stage, her lithe legs barely seeming to touch the ground. "I don't want to," she replied stiffly. "Please, look at me." It took all her strength to slowly turn her eyes to meet his. When she did, she knew that all her defense mechanisms, all the internal promises she'd made to herself, the mental barriers she'd erected and held in place would vanish, disappearing in a single nuclear explosion that eradicated any trace of her previous resolutions. "It's taken me a month to consider our situation and how it all began. You said you didn't drink. I encouraged you to do it. I knew you were off balance by seeing Andre and his date. I heard you sing. I went from respect to desire to craving, then to something more. I make no apologies for that. I am human and I'm a man. It's for crossing a line that should have been done only when you were in full control of your senses. I'm sorry I took advantage of you," he finished, watching her expectantly. She was silent, making him wait a few seconds, each one representing a week when he could have reached out to her, somehow. "You are apologizing for the wrong thing," she said archly. He eyed her. "Is that right?" "Yes, you should be apologizing for ignoring me an entire month after what happened." She met his composed scan of her face with ease. "You don't think I remember what we talked about? What we said?" "I wasn't sure." Danielle looked back to the stage. "For your edification, I remember all of it, from the first drink to the last kiss." "Danielle," he began, touching the back of her hand with his fingertip. "Does that mean you accept my apology?" She faced him. "No, I don't accept your apology." Lars was immobile, save for his mouth that turned down slightly. She waited just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Do you know why?" she asked, proud of herself for keeping her voice even. "You can't take advantage of someone who is at least a partially willing participant." With that statement, Danielle knew she had broken down one more barrier between them. "Partially?" he asked. "Yes, which for your mathematical mind means you weren't entirely in the wrong for what you did." "Entirely?" he repeated, 2 fingers on her hand now. Danielle wasn't entirely trying to stop his touch, and her attention was unable to remain entirely on his eyes, flicking down to his lips and back up. "Perhaps only fractionally," she said. A sense of lightness appeared on his face, as though he appreciated her choice of words. Lars took the time to look at her entire body, and she flushed under the intense scrutiny. It occurred to her that he'd never been in a position to admire her so overtly. The mental sparring with a brilliant, beautiful woman is the ultimate for a man like me, and the physical attraction I have for you is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Over the last month, I've calculated and recalculated the risk and reward associated with you and ultimately determined it's worth it. $1 billion can't buy a woman such as you." Danielle raised an eyebrow and smiled. A man with $1 billion wouldn't want to. The magnetic pull that seemed to connect them increased as they neared one another. "You're right," he said, his voice inviting. "The challenge is in the chase, getting the woman to come to him." "There is no chase, Lars, because I'm not running away." His knee touched hers, electrifying her body. "Make no mistake, Danielle, with you, there will always be a chase." Danielle placed the tip of her index finger on his lower lip, tracing it, watching his eyes as she did so. She heard the music in the background, knowing this is where Anna meets her soon-to-be lover. "Is this venue and this interaction considered discreet?" she whispered, feeling his warmth long before his hand touched her back. His eyes were immobile as she continued to feel the swell of his lips. "I told you, inter-office relations are not an issue, but to answer your question, no one can see us in this box." Danielle suppressed an exhale when he opened his mouth. She thought back to her recent decision to allocate him to a file box of memories without emotion or future. Her finger tingled as she followed the curvature of his lip, then moved down to his chin. "And you're not worried that we will end up like the Doom lovers in this ballet?" Lars moved his fingers into her hair. She shivered and lowered her eyes in pleasure, inviting him to proceed as he wished. He gently pressed against the back of her neck, pulling her to him. "No, and as far as I can tell, I've been right." "Yes," she said quietly, her eyes starting to close. "You have been right all along."